Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And with the budget coming up in just 10 days' time, George Osborne was hoping taxing pensions would help him fill the black hole that seems to be emerging in his public finances. Tax relief on pensions cost the Treasury £34 billion a year. It's a dripping roast. But yesterday, an ally of the Chancellor, as they say in the press, let it be known that there would be no changes to the way retirement savings are taxed in the budget. So why has George Osborne abandoned the idea? Here's our Ellie. I should warn you, her report contains some distressing puns.
For lots of people, retirement looks a little bit like this. The government's drive to encourage us to save for ourselves. But is the current way we save for our pensions an effective and fair way of doing things? Well, in last year's budget, the Chancellor seemed to tee up yet more changes to the system.
Pensions could be treated like ISAs. You pay in from taxed income and it's tax-free when you take it out, and in between it receives a top-up from the government. This idea and others like it need careful and public consideration.
At the moment, pensions contributions are tax exempt because earners get tax relief on what they put in. As the fund grows, they aren't taxed, so again exempt. But you pay income tax when you come to take the money out. It's a principle known as exempt tax. One of the proposals was to turn that on its head by stopping all tax relief on the way in, so taxing contributions, but exempting the fund as it grows and allowing pensioners to take out their money tax-free. So tax exempt, or T. That was described as a pensions ISA. The other option was to introduce a flat rate of tax relief on pension incomes. It would have meant higher rate taxpayers would lose out. The pensions industry estimate the changes could earn the Treasury an extra £10 billion a year, essentially bringing forward tax revenues from years in the future. But £10 billion is, you know, a lot of money, but money that the Chancellor himself could do with.
It is, but it's needed for people's pension savings, and really this is just a short-term tax raid on pension funds.
It didn't go down terribly well with the pensions minister either, who made clear to me the pensions ISA idea would be a big mistake. And when I spoke on Friday to a Tory backbencher opposed to the single rate of tax relief idea, he said his Chancellor's politics had rather gone off course.
It seems to me it is unreasonable, bordering on socialism, to give people tax relief from other people's tax. And it undermines the certainty which people have had with their pension saving. Tricky political territory for the Chancellor.
At a time when he really needs your support.
At a point when he is otherwise so popular because of his stance over the European Union.
So was it because of concern of a backlash from Tory voters, the people the government needs on side ahead of the EU referendum? The Treasury says it was nothing so cynical. It just wasn't the right time. The Chancellor's eyes are on the prize one day of being leader, and he's keen to avoid a repeat of a raft of unpopular measures in 2012.
Even people within Downing Street are calling it an omni-shambles budget.
He's no stranger to climb downs either. Remember tax credits last year?
I've listened to the concerns, I hear and understand them. The simplest thing to do is not to phase these changes in, but to avoid them altogether.
The Chancellor is unlikely to avoid altogether any further rows with his own party, but dumping these pension proposals may have put them off for now. Of course, supporters of the changes say he's missed an opportunity. He may have read the lay of the land for now, but one Tory MP told me he doubted this would be the end of it.
Our Ellie brings new Tigress Woods there. Helen, there's a lot of politics in this. The Chancellor's been under pressure from Tory MPs. His changes suggested were unpopular. I would also suggest that the referendum plays into this. It would mainly affect older people. Older people are more likely to vote no to leave the European Union, and he doesn't want to give them another reason to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll also be looking at this through the prism of tax credits, where he did a U-turn, and let's face it, the election in 2020, it's going to be very hard to say George Osborne nearly did a really beastly thing if you're Labour or the SNP. Voters simply don't remember things that didn't happen in the way they remember things that did happen. And I think pensions is particularly tricky territory. You see WASPI, the Women Against State Pension and Equality campaign. Labour and the SNP together have really managed to get an interesting coalition of opposition. It's one of the few times that Labour have looked like a really effective party opposition around that. And as you say, pensioners vote. People who are close to retirement age vote. And this was potentially a huge landmine for him.
I mean, there were quite strong reasons for unifying the tax relief, making it lower for the better off, making it higher for those on average earnings. It would seem equal. He would have saved some money by doing so. But has he bottled it because he's realised it could get in the way of his leadership ambitions?
Well, it would, at the very least, it would make the next 4 months before the referendum much trickier than they needed to be. And it is interesting that when he capitulates entirely. So on tax credits, he ended up doing none of what he intended. And on this, it's not as if he's preserved 20% of his initial plan. He's pretty much abandoned all of it. And it's because, were you to tax people going into the pension rather than when they come out, all the political losers are in the here and now rather than in 20 years' time. The money is also in the here and now, but the political cost outweighs the benefit in revenue. The ultimate problem he has is that all the obvious tax increases and all the obvious spending cuts happened in the first Parliament between 2010 and 2015. What he's left with now, if he wants to clear this deficit, is a list of almost equally provocative options. If he tries to do tax credits, it's unpopular. If he tries to reform pensions, it's unpopular. Logically, he should be putting on more on petrol duty, given where the oil price is. But you can imagine how provocative that would be among Tory voters. So he's really bound in terms of options.
Well, if his deficit reduction plan's in a little bit of trouble, and it suggests that he may not hit this financial year's target, where does he get the money from?
Well, one possibility is that he may cut the top rate of tax from 45p to 40p. He said in the House of Commons earlier this week that that had raised 8 billion in the financial year 13-14. So perhaps he's preparing a case for that being
but that
net
8
positive.
billion figure is pretty suspect because people knew the tax rate was falling. So in the year 12-13, they held back their income. They didn't pay so much, and then they knew it was coming in 13-14, and they paid a lot more tax. We won't know till we get the 14-15 figures to know if the cut really did generate extra tax, as opposed to just displacing tax year from year.
That's true, but he's already claiming it as net positive to the tune of 8 billion.
That doesn't make it right.
No, but I think he does need to throw some red meat to Conservatives, not only nationally, but within his own party. At the moment, George Osborne makes it look as though the only point in winning general elections is to put yourself in a stronger position to win the next general election, even if that means embracing Labour policies and tacking to the centre. He wants to try, I think, give the impression that there's some vision there, some substance, a genuine Conservative reason for being in politics, and not just being interested in perpetuating his own power.
If he's got serious ambitions, doesn't he have to do something more for Middle Britain than for those in the high rate?
Well, I think that's why it's interesting to see Labour's response to this, which hasn't been on the kind of, why are they letting rich people off kind of vibe, but it has been more on a kind of competence thing. But I think what I think is possibly likely to happen is that he just won't achieve his targets. He has consistently done that and has...
Because that's never happened before.
And has faced almost zero political comeback for doing so. So, that is an artificial target he's created. What happens if he misses it?
And he still gets to borrow at record low interest rates. So, across the pond, 5 more states voted last night in the race for the Democrat and Republican nominations. On the Republican side, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz both won 2 states each. Before voting, Trump asked his supporters at a rally in Florida, the big one coming up there on March the 15th, to pledge their primary votes to him.
I do solemnly swear that I, no matter how I feel, no matter what the conditions, if there's hurricanes or whatever, that's good enough, will vote on or before the 12th for Donald J. Trump for president.
He then went on to give a 3-hour lecture on healthcare reform. Show business taking over there. I would suggest, though, that this is the worst nightmare for the Republican establishment. Trump is still the clear front runner, favorite to win. Their favorite, Mr. Rubio, is almost out of it, will be if he loses his home state on March the 15th. And the one person that could stop Mr. Trump, Ted Cruz, is probably hated even more by the Republican establishment than Mr. Trump. Discuss.
Well, Rubio isn't even number 2 anymore. And if there's a brokered convention in the autumn, it's quite possible that Ted Cruz rather than Rubio ends up as the candidate. As shocking as all of this is, I find Rubio's failure in many ways more interesting than Trump's success, because from an outsider's perspective, he has all the raw materials of a top-level politician. He's young, he's attractive, he's sensible enough by modern Republican standards. He's got a compelling life story. To fail to translate any of that into any degree of momentum at all during this primary campaign, to the point where the only people who think he should be the nominee are people in my profession, really. He's got a big boosterist.
Well, he won the Minnesota caucuses, let's not forget that.
The one state which voted against Reagan in '84.
But don't you feel the same about Jeb Bush, who went into this having raised the most amount of money, what, $160 million from 3 super PACs?
Million of that.
And completely tanked. And the other thing, I think, so there's one argument which is, money controls politics. Well, that's proving quite challenging in this election. And the second thing is the media controls politics. Something you hear a lot, I hear a lot from Jeremy Corbyn supporters, is that Jeremy Corbyn would do much better if only the media would stop attacking him. Well, the media have relentlessly attacked Donald Trump. And guess what? He has something. He is saying something that people want to hear.
Though it's not exactly sure what, but it is a complete nightmare for the mainstream Republicans now. If their choice, as it very much looks so, is down to Trump and Cruz. Cruz so unpopular in the Senate that not a single senator has to come out and endorse him.
I think Trump's popularity is not only a disaster for the GOP, I think it's a disaster for conservatives around the world, because he is associated with the conservative brand. And I think in particular, it's a disaster for those of us who want Western liberal democracy and capitalism to triumph in the global battle of ideas. Trump is like a villain in a Marvel superhero Hollywood blockbuster written by the Islamic State's kind of propaganda mastermind. I mean, what better recruiting sergeant could you have for the Islamic State than this sort of parody of a kind of capitalist, kind of rapacious, billionaire, sexist, racist, Islamophobic kind of ogre?
But other than that, he's very good. The establishment in the Republican Party, they're now hoping for a brokered convention. No. We haven't had one for 60 years. It's a pretty long shot, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think their nightmare must be, and it's not just a nightmare among Republicans, but among the rest of the world and American citizens, that Trump is selected as the candidate, and you think, fine, the worst comes to the worst, Hillary wins, and you have a relatively acceptable president. What if something happens to her between now and November, she gets indicted, or the pressure on her from the email scandal is so strong that she's forced to withdraw? You're then reliant on a third-party candidate entry.
That's why Mr. Biden is probably, Vice President Biden is still tarnishing his credentials.
Or Michael Bloomberg.
Or Mr. Bloomberg. It should be fun. Anyway, we're back same time, same place next week here on BBC One. And the Daily Politics, of course, is back tomorrow. BBC Two throughout every lunchtime.